This is the Comics Alternative Webcomics, reviews of Cookies, All Along the Wall, and Holiday Wars. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics. I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and you're listening to two guys with advanced degrees talking about webcomics.
That's right. And on the December webcomics episode, Sean and I are going to look at three webcomics that have something to do with the holiday season. We're going to begin with Kate Beaton's Cookies. After that, we're going to look at All Along the Wall by Emily Carroll. And then we're going to wrap up with Scott King and Michael Odom's Holiday Wars. But before we get to those titles, we want to let all of you know that this episode of the Comics Alternative Webcomics is brought to you by the great folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There, you're going to find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. For all the other publishers, you'll find that those discounts are anywhere from 20 to 35% off of the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. Sometimes those specials could be as much as 45% off of the cover price. Sometimes 50% off of the cover. But every now and again, you can find discounts that are more impressive than that.
And since we're talking about digital and webcomics here, I think we have to point out their sister company, mydigitalcomics.com,
yep,
where you can get all your fantastic comics in a digital format. It makes sense if you're listening to a webcomics podcast, you might prefer electronic format. They've got tons of great publishers out there that you know and you're familiar with. You like their material. Image, Action Lab, Alterna, a lot of good names out there. And all of the stuff they make available in CBR and PDF formats, which means that they're DRM free, which means that you don't have to worry about, all these arcane technological copyright restrictions and whatnot. So a great format, great setup, a lot of great comics to get if you prefer the electronic versions of your favorites.
That's right. So whether you like your comics in paper version or in digital format, you can't go wrong with the red folks at Discount Comic Book Service and mydigitalcomics.com. Go to dcbservice.com for all of your comics pre-ordering needs and My Digital Comics for your digital needs. And after you do get your titles there, please be sure to send them an email and tell them that Sean and Derek sent you. Well, Sean, here we are in the holiday season. How are things going with you?
It has finally calmed down enough for me to actually enjoy the holiday season.
Good.
It's been one of those crazy busy times. Usually things slow down end of the year for us. Not so much this year. I don't know what the deal was, but a little bit of a break now, so I get to relax and actually enjoy things a bit. How about yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward to relaxing as well. Going to be doing, I think later on, a bit of traveling, but for now I'm staying put over Christmas Day, spending it with my father here in Charlotte. So, I hope it'll be relaxing.
Yeah, now what's the weather hasn't gotten too bad for you guys down there yet, has it?
No. How about up there in Chicagoland?
It's a little chilly, but no real snow to speak of. I think we had one snowfall so far, which is a little unusual for this late in the year.
Well, maybe you'll have a white Christmas.
We'll see. We've only got a few days left to find out.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and get started with the titles that we're going to be discussing for this month. And, as I mentioned at the top of the show, all of these titles have something to do with the holiday season in one form or another. And I think that's one of the things that you and I set out to do. And I don't know. I thought it was a challenge to find webcomics that had something to do with holiday season, specifically Christmas. But I know that I knew about Emily Carroll's All Along the Wall, and you came up with a suggestion of Beaton's Cookies and then Holiday Wars. So so it's interesting that you discovered those. Did you know about those titles? I mean, especially Holiday Wars already?
No, I only discovered Holiday Wars in looking for something to review this month. Cookies I hadn't read specifically, but obviously, I mean, Kate Beaton's got a bit of a name for herself, so I was familiar with her work from before. Not this story particularly, but I thought it was interesting. I don't recall we did a kind of a holiday themed show back for Halloween.
Right.
And I don't recall having any difficulty coming up with a list of Halloween themed webcomics to look at.
Yeah.
But,
and horror, I mean,
and
those are plentiful.
Generally. Yeah. But there was, like you said, there was very little I could find out there with the kind of a holiday theme, regardless of whether you're talking about Christmas or Kwanzaa or Hanukkah or Festivus even, anything along those lines, or New Year's. Nothing was, not very much was coming up when I was looking around for something.
Now, there are strips that may have, like around the holiday season, I don't know, 2 or 3 installments having to do with Christmas or whatever holiday, you celebrate. But finding a webcomic that like specifically deals with the holiday season is a bit of a challenge. But we found 3. Yeah. So that's a good thing. And, you mentioned Kate Beaton. Let's go ahead and start with her. Now,
sure.
The webcomic of hers that we're going to be discussing is Cookies. And our readers can find this by going to www.harkavagrant, HARKAVAGRANT.com, and then they can do a search on Cookies. It's somewhere in there. And we should point out that Cookies is part of Kate Beaton's rather renowned Hark a Vagrant website. And, this is interesting in that Kate Beaton is a really big name in comics, especially, I guess, when it comes to webcomics. But she's published a couple of books based on her webcomics on, Hark a Vagrant. But as famous as she is, this is the first time that we're discussing her on the show.
Yeah, well, she doesn't do typically a lot of really long-form material like what we normally would review here. Right. So even this piece, it's I don't know, it took me all of 5, 10, 15 minutes to read, something like that. And it's all on one page. And a lot of the stuff we tried to do here tends to be the longer form material that's, runs over a period of at least months, if not years. And I think we've even had 1 or 2 that have been a decade or longer.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why we don't, or we haven't really looked at Kate Beaton before, is just because of the format that she frequently chooses.
Kind of a strip nature.
Yeah, it's more of a strip nature, a lot shorter in format, a lot harder to work with in a lot of respects, trying to tell a story in a very succinct manner. But again, it's not something that we typically go for in what we're looking for and what we're reviewing here. Right.
And one of the things that makes Cookies stand out, I guess, amongst the other comics, or the most of the comics, on Hark a Vagrant. And by the way, we should recommend that readers, if they don't, or listeners, if they haven't already, check out Hark a Vagrant, because Kate Beaton's sense of humor is unique. I appreciate it. I don't read her stuff all the time, but when I do, I enjoy it. But what makes Cookies stand out is that this is a long-ish story. Now, as you point out, it didn't take that long to read, so there's not really much there. It is a short story, but compared to the other comics on her Hark a Vagrant website, this is, I guess, considered a sustained narrative.
Yeah, but by comparison.
By comparison,
still,
right. And you mentioned everything is on one page. And another thing that makes Cookies stand out amongst the other comics on Hark a Vagrant is that this one you have to scroll down because it just runs down the page. And I didn't even count the number of panels. I don't know, something like 20, 30, something like that you just scroll down the page. And basically that's the story. Mm-hmm. So speaking of the story, what this is about, it's the, short narrative of a young woman who is by herself over Christmas. And it starts off with her talking to her mother over the phone. Her mother sent her a tree. She's worried that, the daughter's by herself, going to be alone for Christmas. But she's alone because she has to work, and she works at what is this? An oil?
Yeah, it's basically
oil sands mine.
Yeah, and it's an oil sands mine in northern Canada, mm-hmm. and specifically, she works at the
tool shed.
At the tool shed, basically. So any of the people who are working on the mine who need a drill or a wrench or what have you, they'll swing by the tool shed. She's there to, basically check things in, check things out, make sure everything gets back in its proper place and all that.
Right, and she has to be there not just over Christmas, but she has to be there overnight because we see throughout this comic there's a clock on a wall, and every now and again we can see that, she's there very late. So all through the night we have various miners who come in who are requesting one thing or another, and she's there. And I think the Christmas part of this really comes in toward the end. And I mean, I don't want to give anything away, no spoilers or anything like that. But there's one miner who comes in who gives her something, and that touches her in a particular way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what's interesting. It's a very quiet story in that sense, right?
Yes,
like you
that's
said,
a good way of describing it. A quiet story.
Yeah, so she's sitting in this tool shed, and there's. Despite it being Christmas Eve, there's still miners coming in and still working, but obviously at a lesser pace than sometime in the middle of the day in July or something like that. Mm-hmm. So she is kind of bored, and it's a lot of her sitting around, twiddling her thumbs, talking to people as they do come in, when they do come in. And it seems that, one of these miners, sees that and kind of I don't want to say takes pity on her, but says, you know what, that's kind of sucks that you're here working on Christmas Eve by yourself. Nobody's even coming in. Mm-hmm. Let me do something for you.
Yeah.
And just kind of without announcing it in advance, he basically says, here's a little something to make the evening go by a little better, and just to know that people are thinking of you and appreciating you, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And she kind of responds in kind. But in a kind of an interesting, I don't want to say, not surprising per se, but a touching way, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And, after that moment that you just described that I alluded to earlier, the story just ends. There's no neat, tied up resolution, which I like. I appreciate that kind of ambiguous ending.
Yeah, and I get the impression, too, that this is actually an autobiographic comic too. I gather that this is actually she has some kind of note that says something about how she did work there at such a place years back and whatever. Now I don't know, maybe she's making that up too. I don't know. I don't have any reason to doubt her though. So I get the impression that this is just like I'm sure modified slightly for the comic format and whatever, but something that actually happened to her. A decade or two back. So it's a nice little, I don't know, kind of a quiet moment of reflection on around the holiday season. Kind of like, it might be an interesting analogy. It just occurred to me. It might be as if you've got the Charlie Brown Christmas special that everybody knows and loves, but only up to the point where Charlie Brown has that weak little sad tree with the one ornament on it. And but he leaves, and then Linus comes back and says, "You know what? It's not such a bad little tree." And it's like and if you had ended the Christmas specials there, that's kind of where we are, I think, in the in this type of story. There is an ending of sorts. It's not grand. It's not dramatic. It's not the full ending of the Christmas special where all the kids come around and sing carols and whatever. But there's enough of a resolution there, and say, you know what, things are okay. And it's not grand. It's not spectacular. It's not fireworks. But it's a nice, quiet. This is things are okay moment.
Right. There are also some interesting issues that occur at the very beginning of this webcomic. I mentioned a moment ago that it starts off with this young woman talking with her mother over the phone. And in fact, that's probably the most dialogue we get in this comic. Over the first, I guess, 7, 8 panels.
Right.
And, the mother is asking, did you get the tree and everything? And so and the young woman says yes. And what the mother has sent is a little tree along with a box of ornaments. And then we see, once we get down to, I can't remember, like panel 8 or 9, that, the young woman has received the tree, but she hasn't put it up.
Yeah.
And so we
lying flat on the ground.
Yeah, by itself. And, I don't know what that exactly tells us about this young woman and maybe her relationship with her mother. Maybe nothing about the relationship with the mother, but maybe she feels that Christmas just doesn't mean that much to her. At least it doesn't mean enough to set up the tree.
Or at least enough to set up the tree without anybody else there to appreciate it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Because she does because that's one of the interesting things too, is she doesn't set up the tree, or, even, the box of ornaments is kind of just sitting there as well, right? But she does take one of the ornaments out, takes it to the tool shed, and hangs it on the pegboard or the calendar, next to the calendar or something along on the wall there. So it doesn't seem to be that she's unappreciative of the gift or dismissing of the holiday entirely, just that, there's no one else there to appreciate it, so why set it up?
Yeah, that's a good point.
We're at least in the tool shed, there's going to be a couple of miners come in asking for a pipe wrench or whatever to see, oh, you know what, you did a little bit there, that's nice.
Right, yeah. And that ornament that she takes with her before she leaves for work becomes important toward the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, it's an interesting short piece, and it does speak to the holiday season.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about what do you think of the title Cookies?
It certainly wouldn't have been one that I've chosen, but it makes sense once you read through the whole thing, I think. I think it goes to that nature of, it's not, I think it's not so much, what the cookies are in terms of, sugary confectionery treat kind of thing, but more what they represent.
Right.
And I think that, again, going back to kind of that Linus talking about that little sad tree, it's not the glitz and the glamour and the lights and the presents and all that. It's the humanity, right? That you're just, reaching out and touching somebody in whatever way that you can. And, even if you're stuck up in, where was it? Fort McMurray, Canada, I think is what it was.
Yeah. Even
Even if you're stuck up in the middle of nowhere in a half abandoned tool shed in the middle of winter during Christmas Eve, that's fine. There are people out there who care about you and are thinking about you, even if they're not there with you at that time.
Right. Yeah. And I think one of the things that you were alluding to is the fact that the title does make reference to something that happens toward the end of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
But like I said, I think it's more, I think the importance of it is less the physical representation and kind of the more the emotional one that's tied to it.
Yes, definitely. Well, let's move to the next piece that we're going to be looking at this month, and that is Emily Carroll's All Along the Wall. And this can be found at mcarroll, EMCARROLL.com/comics/wall for this particular story. But this is by far not the only Emily Carroll that we have discussed on the webcomics episode, because I think one of our first webcomic episodes, Andy Wolverton and I discussed an Emily Carroll story. So, she has a lot of individual pieces on her website, and this is just one of the stories.
Yeah, and I think it's I'm not as familiar with her as you are, I don't think, but I think she's kind of got the same approach that Kate Beaton does, in that she has a lot of these shorter stories. This one's certainly longer than Cookie's was,
right?
But it's I think a lot of her stuff is definitely more in the short form category. Yeah,
definitely short form, but it's different from Kate Beaton in that it's not like short strip pieces.
Right.
I mean, Emily Carroll's are much more elaborate. I think they make use of animation at times. We don't have any animation in All Along the Wall.
We do have one. It's hidden.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. I only discovered it about an hour ago while I was reviewing it. Yeah.
Oh, what is that? Because I missed that.
It's on the last page. If there's one of the panels, or I think it's actually a set of panels. They look fine. They're just sitting there like everything else. But then when you hover over them, they change.
Oh, okay.
And I did not discover that at first. That was I
see now. Yes, I see exactly what you're referring to.
It's a nice little kind of hidden bit towards the end.
It is, and it comes right before kind of a critical reveal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. That's okay. So she does make use of animation here.
She snuck that one in.
Exactly. And another thing that Emily Carroll does with many of her stories is she plays around with color. Most of her comics are in this kind of black and white grayscale, which fits the mood, because she's primarily known as a horror or maybe gothic writer. And this is I think a horror/gothic Christmas story that we have here.
Yeah.
But playing around with color, so you'll have primarily black, white, and gray, but then when she brings in other colors, many times red, that's significant. There's something important going on there. And also another difference between Emily Carroll and Kate Beaton is the way that Emily Carroll reveals her story. Many times it's in an unconventional manner. I think this comic, it's 3 pages long, and it's more or less conventional. You do have to scroll down. Some of her comics, though, you don't just scroll down. Sometimes you have to scroll over. Sometimes there's no set path to take, that you're kind of thrown into the first page, and then depending on where you click is where the story goes next. So she really does mix it up at times.
Mm-hmm. But like you said, in this particular case, it's a pretty straightforward narrative, in terms of the layout and structure in that. It's a simple story. Seemingly simple story, at least at first glance, is basically one woman goes over to another woman's house for a holiday party, and their 2 daughters, which seem to be in, I think the one's maybe about 7 or 8, and the other one's maybe 16, thereabouts.
Rebecca, Rebecca is the teenager, and then Lottie's the younger one.
Right. And the story shifts over to them, and they're meeting for the first time, and Lottie, the younger one, just asks, hey, can you tell me a story?
Right, because she's bored with the party, and so when she's in Rebecca's room, Rebecca says, "Hey, you're in my room," and Lottie says, "I'm just bored. I need something." And then Rebecca says, "Oh, because it's Rebecca's house. You know, she doesn't want her guests to be bored. So she said, what can I do to make it less boring for you?" And Lottie says, "Tell me a story." She said, "My grandfather said that people used to tell ghost stories over Christmas. So tell me a story." And what Lottie wants is something that is horrific, that has blood. She says maybe a murder. That's not the story that Rebecca tells, though. Although the story that she does share with Lottie, I think, is even more horrific than something that would have, kind of, overt violence, blood, murder, things of that sort.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting things I liked about the structure and the layout of the story is that even though the kind of the primary action of these characters is, like you kind of alluded to earlier, is black and white, the story that Rebecca tells is done in full color.
That's right.
Which then kind of is how do I want to say this? Is then kind of picked up a little bit towards the end of the story too, and used in I think an interesting manner to highlight that this isn't a kind of traditional Christmas tale. Even more, we've got this little horror story in the middle of it, so obviously it's a little, it's not your typical festive unwrapping presents and Santa Claus and all that. But there's after Rebecca finishes this tale, then it goes back to black and white as the two girls are just kind of sitting alone in the room and fixing each other's hair and whatnot. But then there's a couple of little spots of color used
on that last page.
On that last page,
right?
That just say, there's that's where this horror really is. Like you said, it's not the axe wielding murderer or anything like that. There's kind of thinking something a little bit more sinister and a little bit more subtle, and that's conveyed largely, I think, through these little spot colors used. Right. And so it's a very, very interesting and effective use, I think, of color, both color and black and white.
Right. Now, we mentioned that this story is 3 pages long, and in all 3 pages, they you scroll down. So there's, quite a bit of comic on each page. And on the first page, we have the black, white, and gray. Then on the second page, which is more or less Rebecca's story, the one that she tells Lottie, that's in as full color, as you mentioned. And then the third page is back to primarily black, white, gray, but with spots of color. And the spots of color are significant because those are, I guess, where the reveals are, so to speak. Mm-hmm. Now, the story that, we don't want to give anything away in terms of what happens at the very end, let's say on that last page, but the story that Rebecca tells Lottie is, more or less straightforward. She says, there once was this girl who lived in a house, kind of like this house, and she slept in a room, kind of like this room, because they're in Rebecca's room. And she couldn't get to sleep because she, I guess, saw something along the wall. And she would call out to her mother. Her mother would come in. There was nothing there. And then after a while, something started to happen to the young girl. And it's almost as if, the way it's described, she kind of like opens up and there's something inside of her that comes out. And so you get a sense that the thing that had been scurrying, scuttling along the wall may actually have been the thing inside the little girl. And that's the story that Rebecca tells Lottie.
Who immediately responds with, "That's it?" Yeah. She's totally not happy with this story. She's expecting, ghosts and demons or something, and flat out says, "Well, that wasn't very scary." But then I think that's, and again, going back to some excellent use of storytelling on Carol's part, is that it, even though, even as a reader, you're sitting there thinking, well, okay, there's a little kind of a mystery horror element to there, but she didn't really get into it too much. So there's not a whole lot to react to, and there's not really an ending to it. And yeah, all right, I say whatever. But because of Carol's storytelling, she's able to emphasize, I think, very well that, well, wait a minute, there's actually some subtext to that horror if you start thinking about it, and it's a lot more sinister than that short little tale would immediately let on.
Right.
And like I said, she does that, I think, in a very clever and interesting way, with her color reveals and on this last page.
Right. And another thing we get on this last page, and again, this is not giving anything away, but we're given an added twist because Lottie, as you point out, says, well, that's not very good. That's not very scary. And she suggests that she thought Rebecca could do better because of something that had happened in Rebecca's, I guess, relatively recent past. And we learned that Rebecca, at one point, for some reason, ran away, got lost, and was gone and couldn't be found for several days. And it was because she was stuck in a cave. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's basically all the information we get. But with the story that Rebecca tells, the fact that she has this past where she was lost and something traumatic perhaps happened to her, then we can start putting, pieces together to suggest that maybe Rebecca is talking about herself.
Yeah. And I think, like I said, there's a lot of it. Even if you miss that kind of hidden animation thing that I just described earlier, even if you miss that, which I did, like I said, the first time I read through this, there's still enough in the story that you still get the right impression. I think that story, that narrative is still conveyed sufficiently well, that you understand what Carol is trying to get through with this story. And the fact that there's this little hidden animation in there gives you another layer of depth, I think, that you didn't realize was there if you miss it the first time. Which, I don't know. When I first found it, I was kind of excited and interested in that. It sounded like, Derek, when I just explained it to you, you were pleasantly surprised and got something out of that as well.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And appropriately enough, the penultimate panel of this comic ends with Rebecca, as she leaves Lottie, saying, "Merry Christmas." And I say the penultimate panel because that last panel, it's extremely dark and you really can't make out much. I mean, you can make out a silhouette, I guess, of Lottie's head, but that silhouette looks quite disturbing. Oh,
yeah. Which is really surprising for as little detail as there in that last panel. As dark as it is really surprisingly creepy.
Right, it is. Well, I mean, we're talking about Emily Carroll here. So
that is true.
Of course, it has to be creepy to some degree. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So that's a great little short comic that I think is perfect for the holiday season, especially if you like horror stories told to you for Christmas. Okay, we're going to move on to the last webcomic that we're going to look at, and this is substantially, and that's I want to underscore substantially, longer than the first two pieces that we discussed. This is Holiday Wars. This is written by Scott King with art by Michael Odom, and you can find this at www.holiday-wars.com. That's holiday-wars.com. Oh, this is quite a long webcomic. We have it. It's in 4 volumes. And just the first volume, it just seemed to take forever to get through. I mean, there's a lot there. How would you set up and describe Holiday Wars?
You know what? I'm going to cheat on this, and I'm going to use the description they have for the first printed book, which I think it does a fairly good job of summing this up, better than I could anyway. Holidays reflect the current culture of a society, and like a shifting tide, they change. Realizing this, the Easter Bunny declares war on the other holidays in the hopes of gaining the one thing that can guarantee his immortality, the holiday spirit. Foreseeing the bunny's betrayal, Santa hid the holiday spirit and marked Tegan Cassidy, a human infant, granting her the ability to find it. After 16 years of war, nearly all the holidays have been killed or have joined the bunny. Led by Earth Day, the ragtag group of observances still fighting turn now to a teenage Tegan in the hopes that she can lead them to the holiday spirit. So basically what you've got here is the premise, I guess, or the conceit of the story is that every holiday has a physical personification of it.
Right.
And that gets not just the ones that you know off the top of your head, like Easter and Christmas and all that, but even all the weird, obscure, little tiny holidays that you never heard of, like Talk Like a Pirate Day or Opposite Day, a lot of things that like barely even really qualify as holidays per se.
Yeah, in fact, there's even one for Black Friday.
There's one for Black Friday, yes.
Who becomes
exactly.
a major character in the story.
Right. And the way it's explained in the story is that the holiday, the personification of the holiday is granted additional power by the belief in it or the strength of the belief in it. So the more popular the holiday is, the more widely known the holiday is, the stronger and more powerful the personification of it. And likewise, as alluded to in the little setup I read there, if that holiday, if the nature of that holiday changes, so too does that avatar or does that personification. And that's part of where the Easter Bunny is upset, is he did not used to be a happy, fluffy, bunny rabbit in a vest and bow tie and whatever. He used to be a pagan god, and he's transformed over the years as the nature of the Easter holiday has changed. And he's upset by that. He doesn't want to change into something that he can't control. Hence where this war comes from. If he can gain the holiday spirit, he would have control over his avatar, or his personification. And he's been very embittered by that because a lot of the holidays have gained power and he has not. He's seemingly lost power over the centuries.
Right. Yeah. So, as you pointed out, Santa imbues a human, Tegan, with, I guess, the holiday spirit, or at least the potential to capture the holiday spirit. And I wanted to ask you, how did you, in reading Holiday Wars, conceive of this idea of holiday spirit?
Honestly, I was a little... I thought that was a little vague, honestly. And because I think there's a really interesting idea here, but it didn't seem to be fully coalesced. And this doesn't speak to the storytelling or the narrative of the story itself. But just at a general kind of conceptual level, there's some bits that just didn't seem to be explained particularly well. In part, there's that whole thing with some of these characters that aren't holidays per se, like Talk Like a Pirate Day. That's not really a holiday. It's an observance, maybe for some people, kind of, but it's not really a holiday per se. So that definition of what a holiday is gets kind of vague. Earth Day was another one that's not really. It's sort of a holiday, but not really. But then they're also treating the character as like Mother Gaia, kind of an Earth spirit character. So in all of that, this notion of the holiday spirit, I didn't quite get a good grasp on what exactly that is either.
Yeah, and in fact, Earth Day, Mother Gaia's son, which is Arbor Day, is more of a holiday than I think that Earth Day is.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but getting back to this whole idea of the holiday spirit, there are a couple of times, at least in this first volume, where they discuss what the holiday spirit is and why it's so significant. But even after reading those passages, I was still a little unclear as to exactly what the holiday spirit was, why it's so important that they find it, why the Easter Bunny is after it as well. So,
yeah, and like I said, I think there's some interesting ideas here, but I don't know that. It's just they didn't quite gel to completely for me, There's just enough of that fuzziness is like, well, why is Black Friday hanging around these people? Where does that come from? And then there's this nature of, okay, so they're at war, right? The Easter Bunny versus whoever's, Santa and Memorial Day and all those.
The Memorial Day is absent though, because they allude to her.
Well, yeah. See, so that was another confusing point for me. So allegedly, these holidays are basically the personification of these holidays have been around since the holiday was first celebrated, right. And that makes sense. But because this is a war, and there are there's a lot of battles in here, and as with any battle or war, people get injured and killed, including some of the holidays.
In fact, we see Flag Day get killed.
Right, exactly. So then what happens is, because you can't suddenly not have Flag Day anymore, because people still believe in it, and there's still, there's this human notion that is a holiday and that there is some kind of embodiment to that should go along with that, then the spirit of that holiday then transfers to another being that already exists. Mm-hmm. And in some cases that's human. I think we've got a couple others. One is transferred to an elephant. There's another one that I think is a gopher. There's another holiday that gets transferred into a jackalope. But it's unclear to me why that would even be a thing. Mm-hmm. If a holiday is started as, okay, you had Earth Day and I forget who she mated with to get Arbor Day, but there's the way our
equinox.
Yeah, that's it. It was equinox again, which isn't really a holiday, but yeah, Earth Day and equinox mated and had Arbor Day. So when Arbor Day gets killed, then wouldn't there just be you'd have to create a new Arbor Day, not transfer the soul of Arbor Day into another being. It's just got a little fuzzy on what the rules are, I guess, on how all this worked.
Yeah. Now, we mentioned that Memorial Day is completely absent, although every now and again people will allude to her. And it is a her because we learn that apparently, I guess, Labor Day had a relationship with Memorial Day, which makes sense. Memorial Day, Labor Day.
Sure.
Labor Day is one of the main characters in this story, one of the main fighters. So Memorial Day is mentioned within the context of her relationship with Labor Day, even though we never see Memorial Day. And we don't even get much of a backstory of their relationship. I mean, why, how important was Memorial Day to Labor Day?
Well, and this is where it gets interesting towards the end. And I know you weren't able to complete reading the whole thing, but in the fourth chapter, we start to get some of the backstory of who Memorial Day became. Because what happens is, again, going back to that transferring of powers and whatever, Memorial Day is the spirit of the embodiment of Memorial Day, whatever you want to call it, then gets transferred to one of the other human characters that we have set up at the start, Beth, who is a friend of Tegan's, or a schoolmate of Tegan's, I should probably more accurate to say. Why Beth gets Memorial Day, I don't know. But then it turns out that she has a long backstory with between her mother and some of the other spirits and April Fool's Day. So we do start to get some of those reveals later on in the story. But again, it takes a long time to get there just because it's a long story. And B, it's still a little confusing on, okay, yeah, they've got a history here and it's explained, but maybe not as explained in as much detail as you would like, perhaps, right. Or at least up to this point. It looks like there's no. I mean, we're in chapter or volume 4 now. It looks like they have no intention of slowing down, or well, they have slowed down for other reasons temporarily. They're on a hiatus right now because of Hurricane Harvey hit a little while back there, and that's caused some problems. But that was literally the first break they've had in, I think it's been 5-6 years, something like that. Mm-hmm. Posting 3 times a week. So I think as soon as they kind of are finally able to resolve whatever garbage happened with Hurricane Harvey, and I don't know the full extent of it, but they've been on hiatus for a few months now, so I'm assuming it's extensive. But barring that, I don't doubt that they have plenty more to go through, and they have more intention of explaining all this. They just haven't gotten to all of that yet. Yeah. And I think one of the you could certainly call it a strength to this is that they've clearly thought out a lot of these different elements, and they've kind of thought out a good chunk of this story world, and I think it makes sense in their head, but they haven't explained everything so far. And I think the reason they're doing that, I suspect this is deliberate, is so that they can actually have a running narrative, mm-hmm. right? Because if you stopped and had to expound on, here's Memorial Day. And well, Memorial Day is this type of character, and he's got this history, she's got this history with these other characters, and she came from this, and then is transferred over to this character, yada, yada, yada. That's going to weigh the story down something fierce. And if you did that with every introduction, every time a new character comes along, because there's a ton of holidays. Right. And some of them even have multiple personas. Like President's Day, it is literally all the presidents. Yeah. And in fact,
at one point it's Teddy Roosevelt. At other times we see other presidents. And I think even Obama is in there. Yeah. It's literally every president. Mm-hmm. So if you had to stop every time one of those characters came up and talk about, okay, well, this is their history, this is where they started, and this is how they're related to these other holidays, you'd have a deadly dull story. Mm-hmm. It would just be all exposition. Right. So I think what they've done is they've sacrificed some of that and trying to drip that out over a longer period of time so that they can advance an actual a plot, So, okay, the Easter Bunny is trying to destroy things here for his own selfish benefits, and there's a war going on. And if you've got something called Holiday Wars and don't have people fighting, you're gonna lose your audience real quick. Mm-hmm. So I kind of get that. And I think that's intentional. But at the same time, it can be frustrating on occasion too that there's not more. That we don't have more of that backstory readily available. Right. And we should underscore the fact that, the reason that we're talking about Holiday Wars on a show where we're looking at Christmas or holiday webcomics is that Santa Claus is one of the big players. And in fact, he's the main honcho on I was about to say the good faction, right? Because if the Easter Bunny is the evil one, then the Santa and his faction is the more positive, upbeat, heroic group. Yeah, and one of the things I thought was interesting about the story too is you can't.
I think one of the things I likened this to when I think I first suggested it is we looked at Breakfast Wars a little while back, and
That's right.
What was interesting, one of the things that I thought was interesting about that was that he had imbued these mascots, which were little more than just a drawing, right? There's not a whole lot of characterization there. He imbued them with a lot of characterization that made sense for what the character seemed to be based off of the one image on the front of the box. Mm-hmm. I think if you did that with holidays, you'd get something very skewed towards, positive things, right? There are a handful of kind of obvious villains in holidays, right? You might get a witch type of character or a demon type of character with Halloween. There's a Krampus you could pull into Christmas. You start running out real quick after that, though, right? So I think one of the interesting things that they've done here is put some interesting spins on the characters. For example, the Easter Bunny being one of the main bad guys. That's not something I think most people would think. Oh yeah, that's clearly the Easter Bunny is going to be the bad guy. Well, not so much. And another twist is April Fools as one of the other characters out there. He would be a
main character, villain.
Very, very main character. But that's the interesting thing with April Fools is you would expect April Fools of any holiday to be one of the villains. And he starts off as a villain, but then you realize it's actually a lot more of a nuance to the character. Mm-hmm. And as he goes forward, and then he actually becomes, it's not so much a character journey where he becomes a hero, but his supposedly villainous intents that you've seen up front are not so villainous after all.
Right. Well, he's the trickster character here in this story. And he's also someone who, I guess, his one of his defining features is that he can change appearance. And so with his ability to morph and change in terms of how he appears, he can appear as one person or another or a thing. It makes sense that he change in terms of character or evolve in terms of character, as you were pointing out.
Yeah. It's actually, he reminds me almost of like a Loki type of character.
Yes, that's good.
Where it's very easy to portray him as a villain. But as, we saw in the last Thor movie, that's not always the case. There's certainly there's more of a nuance on a character like that than just, okay, he's the bad guy, he's the good guy, here's white hats, black hats kind of thing. Mm-hmm. There's definitely a lot more going on there.
Right.
And I think that makes some of these characters, April Fools in particular, a lot more interesting and a lot more nuanced than they might otherwise be. Mm-hmm. And speaking of, if I might segue a bit here.
Sure.
That was actually one of the things that as the story progresses, there's hints of this early on, but as the story progresses, we get more a sense of Tegan and Beth's home life, right? Because they're spending a lot of time trying to, defeat the Easter Bunny or some of these other villain characters. Like I said, there's plenty of battles, plenty of actual war going on with these different holiday avatars. But these are still teenage girls we're talking about here, the Beth and Tegan. And they have home lives that they're dealing with. And I think that's actually one of the things that I found most interesting about the characters is they're trying to deal with the kind of the interpersonal reactions. Tegan, for example, is a foster child. She's grown up not knowing her parents because Santa took her at a very young age to, with the holiday spirit and there's a whole story behind that, right? So she's grown up in the foster care system and never really had a solid home life. And that's something that plays out for her periodically throughout the story, which is, I think, interesting. And kind of similarly, her friend, or again, schoolmate Beth, apparently right before the story begins, she lost her father. And then as you read on, you find out, well, wait a minute, there's a lot more going on than, okay, she just lost her father. Yeah, that's obviously clearly a traumatic event for her, and that's a driving factor in some instances. But then when her mother later on starts talking about, well, here's more backstory about you, about your family, about your past, about how all of this comes together. Then there's a whole nother dynamic with that, because a lot of what Beth grew up thinking was her family wasn't the family she thought it was. So then there's a whole family dynamic thing going on there, which again I found personally a lot more interesting and engaging than trying to duke it out with the Easter Bunny type of things.
Right.
Instances.
Now I want to ask you something. Throughout Holiday Wars, we have the main storyline, depending on what volume you're in. Mm-hmm. But then sprinkled throughout the website are tangential stories. And I think the Tales of Holidays Past.
Yeah.
I found that the interspersing of those stories, Tales of Holiday Past, along with the main storyline, a little confusing.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to realize that, these are different stories and, not part of the main storyline. And I wonder if you thought that was a problem of inserting those various short pieces, Tales of Holiday Past, into the main storyline of Holiday Wars.
Yeah, I think that's a mostly a problem with the user interface of the website more than anything else, because there's not, if you're just kind of clicking through, there's not a clear and obvious enough distinction, I don't think, between one and the other. So if you just start at the beginning and click next, and then suddenly you get this Tales of Holidays Past thing pops up.
And they're different stories, right? There are a variety of them, not just one Tale of Holiday Past. I mean, they're tales, plural, of Holiday Past.
Right. And really the only significant indication that you're kind of, okay, we've paused the main story and we've gone over to this, is a change of artist.
Right.
Which I don't think is sufficient enough for a lot of readers. And you get something like what you and I experienced. It's like, wait, hold on. Are we still in the same story here?
A little confusion.
Yeah, there's a little bit of confusion as we're going on there. And I don't begrudge them for including those stories at all. I mean, I'm sure those were done to A, expand on the characters and the backstory and all that, and B, to give the regular artist a little bit of a break, and let them catch up. I get that. That's fine. But the UI, I think, didn't make that sufficiently clear that, okay, we're out of the main story for a bit. We need to get into this other story to let the artist catch up, or whatever the reason is. I think it would have made more sense if those were spaced out as, chapter breaks or something like that. And I think we've seen that in some other stories. I'm drawing a blank on any off the top of my head, specific ones, but I think we've seen that in the past where, there'll be a regular main story going along, they get to an end of a chapter, and then we've got, 6 weeks of this kind of a fill-in issue, which does a little backstory or a flash forward or a side story or something like that.
Right.
Before getting to the next chapter and then continuing on. I think that interspersing them, like we're seeing here, ends up being a little bit more confusing than it needs to be as you're going through.
Yeah.
Because then you end up going back and forth between the two stories. And again, without any real clear indication which one you're in necessarily.
Right. But, something that we should again underscore is this is quite a substantial webcomic. And it goes, when did it start? 2000?
I think 2010, 2011, something like that. 2010.
2010, yeah. So this
July of 2010.
Yeah, and it's still going. So if you're interested in this and you start at the beginning, just know that it's not going to be one where you can just sit down over a couple of days and get everything. I mean, they do spread out their story and kind of decompress it in such a way that there's a lot to this. There's a lot of heft, which is quite different from the other two webcomics that we looked at this month.
Yeah, well, and that's like we talked about before starting. That's why we're kind of doing this one a little bit separate and after the break there, precisely because it's so much longer and gets so much more detail than the others. Mm-hmm. But yeah, there's a lot there, and this is a good time to catch up if you want to start taking a look at it and maybe read through the first several pages or even the first chapter or first volume. Now is a good time to catch up. Like I said, they were hit by Hurricane Harvey a few months ago. They've been on hiatus since then. And because of that, you will have a little bit of a chance to actually try and catch up. Yeah. If they were still going, like I said, that they have not missed an update 3 times a week for several years now. So
also, if you have
take advantage of the break, I think.
Yeah. Also, if you have a break this holiday season, then you have the opportunity to read Holiday Wars.
Absolutely.
Well, Sean, we looked at 3 webcomics that have something to do with the holiday season. We started off with Kate Beaton's Cookies, which is part of her Hark a Vagrant website. Then we looked at Emily Carroll's rather creepy All Along the Wall. And then we wrapped up with Scott King and Michael Odom's Holiday Wars. So 3 really interesting holiday-themed webcomics to check out.
Not a lot of different takes on the Christmas holiday too.
That's right.
Not getting a lot of overly saccharine messages this time out.
Yes. Yes, and if you want to check out comics that are really cool like this, then head over to the website of our sponsor, which is Discount Comic Book Service. Go to dcbservice.com and you will find a slew of great discounts. And if you like your comics in digital format, remember their sister company is mydigitalcomics.com. So that's dcbservice.com and mydigitalcomics.com. And after you do get your titles there, get in touch with us and let us know what you're going to be reading. If you go to our website, comicsalternative.com, you'll find that you can leave us a voice message online via SpeakPipe. Or you can call us the old-fashioned way by picking up the phone and dialing 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
Or you can actually reach us by email if you prefer. If you want to send us a link to a comic that you want us to check out, we'd be happy to take a look at it. Email might be a little easier than trying to read those URLs over the phone. You can email us at twoguys, TWOGUIS, at comicsalternative.com. Or you can email me directly at Sean, SEAN, at comicsalternative.com.
Or me at Derek at comicsalternative.com. And you can find us all over social media, such as on Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, Instagram, Google+, Goodreads, Pinterest, and YouTube. We're also on the Slack channel. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes or Apple Podcast. You can stream us on Stitcher. You can find us on TuneIn, on Spotify, on iHeartRadio, and on Google Play Music. But you can find every single episode as well as the various reviews and commentary that we post on our blog simply by going to the website comicsalternative.com.
That's the easiest to remember, I think, personally.
That's right. Yeah, just go to comicsalternative.com, click on the Contact Us tab, and you'll find all those ways of getting in touch with us.
and you get to pick your favorite. Whatever you're comfortable with, we'll meet you there.
That's right. Well, we hope that all of you listeners have a great holiday season. And Sean, I wish you a Merry Christmas as well.
And same to you, Derek. Hope everything is smooth and awesome with your family, and you have a great New Year's here.
Thank you very much. Until next month, I'm Derek.
And I'm Sean, and we'll see you next month.